Okay, thank you, Stefan, for having me in this conference with a cool topic. I think I've never heard it in a DITA conference that we have such a long session about translation and that what's behind going global. So let's talk about DITA and XLIFF. XLIFF, a standard for translation, interchange format for translation, not only for DITA, but as we are in a DITA conference, we are talking about DITA today. So, but let's start to introduce myself. My name is Markus Wiedenmaier. I'm the CEO of SRX.net GmbH. We are based in the south of Germany, and we have our own product, which is called SRX.net, and has two modules. One is DTS, which means Digital Transformation Service, and the other one is IDS for Information Delivery. And for information delivery, the focus is on an API to technical content based on the IRRDS standard. And what we are doing with SRX, we are combining a lot of standards all around the XML world to get unstructured documents to structured documents and do any kind of stuff you could imagine. So I think the most common use case is just data conversion from InDesign, Word, FrameMaker, or any custom XML to DITA or any other XML flavor, with connection to third-party tools like PLM systems, ERP systems, or translation memory systems. That's the one module, and the other module is the content delivery part. Our focus is on the content API to connect machines, or let's say in a more common way, any kind of software to your technical content, and make relations from one content to another, or one machine component to a topic or so. And so the basic is the API. Up on this, there is an HTML5 framework, so you can easily integrate your content to existing portals or web applications or whatever you think about. And a certain use case is the content delivery portal, but we have also connected diagnostics software, spare part shops, so you can combine your content. But today we are talking about the left part, about data conversion and a special conversion process, which is conversion from DITA to XLIFF and from XLIFF back to DITA to get translated content in a automated way. And I think the word automation you will hear a lot of times today in this presentation, as we focus on automation of technical documentation processes. So the agenda for today, we start with a small background how translation processes works and why translation is done and so on, and how we can get the ownership of the translated content back to the real owner, the company who creates the content, and this is responsible for the content. And then we have the business perspective. We want to save money as translation is expensive, and so the process needs to be slim and fast to save money. With the next part, we show a short demo within FrameMaker 2020, which supports an XLIFF export and import for DITA and unstructured FrameMaker also. And then for the nerds in this room, we are talking about technology, and we will see a lot of angle breakers. And at the end, if there is some time, we have an FAQ where you can ask questions, or I will answer the questions in the chat also. So let's go to the background. And you see in my slides, we are talking about XLIFF translation, and all what you hear now, today, which is related to DITA, you can transfer to any format, to Word documents, InDesign documents. You can use the same process. The only difference is the input and the output format. So it's quite easy to adopt this approach for any kind of content which needs to be translated in your companies. So why are companies invest money into translation? So the first thing is that they translate content to meet local expectations for custom service. So they have local companies which needs their content in the language of their employees to understand what the product does and how it should be maintained or repaired or so. And they translate content to maintain and increase the value of their brand, to make the brand more valuable. And of course, the most important reason is to meet legal and regulatory requirements. Especially if you have machines which you ship to the EU, you have to ship your documentation in the language of the market. Otherwise, you are not allowed to sell your machine or products. Then, of course, you need to translate content to reach more customers, to catch them with their own language and get them to your products. And last but not least, they translate content to increase turnover to the global markets. And if you see how the translation markets expands in the last years, we are in 2009, we have a translation market which with a value of $23 billion per year, and just 10 years later, we have a market from 49, let's say $50 billion per year, and it's increasing in future. And this means that the costs is not because translation is getting more expensive. It's just more content to be translated in the last 10 years. So that's why the costs are rising in this, are doubled in the last 10 years. And the future trend is still increasing. And so we have to think about how we can reduce the costs of translation. And this means how can we integrate and automate our process to have a standardized process, to have a stable process, to have interfaces to language service providers and so on. So that's the point what we are talking about. And let's have a look how a classic translation process works today. It's not that bad as it works, but we start with an export of data from a repository. Let's say it's a Git or Bitbucket, CCMS or AEM or whatever. We have content in a repository which needs to be translated. So we export this content from this repository, zip it, and email it to the translator. And our job in-house is done as we send the content to the translator. And now the translator or language service provider starts his job. He imports the stuff to a CAT tool like Trados, Across, or MemoQ, or whatever. There are a lot of translation memories on the market. Convert them to an internal format when the content is imported. So each format needs its separate filter, which needs to be configured. And when it's imported, the content is segmented so that single segments gets translated, not complete paragraphs, just sentences in this content are segmented, so it makes it easier to translate and make reuse of existing translation. After that, the content is translated with a pre-translation process. So in a CAT tool, the source content is checked if there is an existing translation in the target language, and if so, it's integrated. Translation memory systems are making use of machine translations, or they let machine translation systems pre-translate the content, and so they post or they edit them, and after translation is done, the translation memory is updated and the translation is exported back to the file system. So it's, in the case of DITA, converted to DITA and sent back to the content owner. All this configuration in the CAT tool is done by the language service providers, and for this it needs some project management. If anything's changed in the input format for the CAT tool, project management has to check and reconfigure the system. So, and if translation is done back to the content owner, it's re-imported to the repository and ready for a release process or publish process, however this works in a certain company. So that's the classic translation process. And it's not bad, and it works. But in this case, you are not the owner of your content, as you send your source files to the language service providers, and the language service providers has to manage your content, your data structure, and your data. So you send it out to the language service providers, and the language service providers do all the stuff which is necessary to get content translated. And you are not the owner of the process. So as soon as you send it out to the translation to the language service provider, it's up to the language service provider to handle this content, and you have no influence how he does this, and if the CAT tool is configured well for your needs. It's all on the side of the language service provider. And you are not free to change tools, data structure, or the language service provider itself. So you send the content out, and what is done is up to the language service providers. You have no influence. And with XLIFF, I think you can make your process more free, more suitable to your company. And if translation is automated or not, is not on your side, it's on the LSP side. So before we go to the XLIFF part, let's go one step back to DITA World 2019. There I had a presentation with Andreas Wolf from HOMAG, and there we showed how we integrate FrameMaker into an SAP process, or in into SAP as a repository for DITA content. And there I showed how LSP works with HOMAG's content in a translation process. So HOMAG edits their content in FrameMaker. When editing process is finished, they check in their content, and when they check in from any topic in this package, an XLIFF file is generated and managed in SAP. The LSP has direct access to SAP. They have a connection with their TMS system, so they get notified if there is new content to be translated. They download their XLIFF content automatically for translation, create a project in the TMS, and a translator translates the necessary stuff. And when translation is finished, the LSP uploads translation automatically to SAP. So, and as soon as this is done, translation is published automatically for certain machines. So we have a direct integration from the LSP into editing and translation workflows at HOMAG, which is managed in SAP. Why is HOMAG doing this? A situation at HOMAG is that it is that they are sure that their DITA data structure will change in future in a continuous improvement process. We have specialized DITA content, and by the way, we have only a project with specialized DITA content or DITA structures. So they know in future we will need to make changes in this data structure. We will develop new topic types to integrate more documentation into this workflow. And process has to be standardized and it has to be stable. Stable means if they change anything at HOMAG, they don't want to affect the process of at the LSP side. It should work as before, and they can do at HOMAG whatever they need. So process has to be in control of HOMAG and not of the LSP. And as said, internal circumstances must not affect the processes at the LSP. So we need a standard format for this data exchange, and this is XLIFF. So how does a translation process with XLIFF look like? It's more or less the same as before, or not. Let's see. We need to export data from the repository. In the case of HOMAG, the export is done automatically as they have a connection to as the LSP has a connection to SAP. We need to convert this to XLIFF. This is done at HOMAG when the document is checked in and is sent to LSP. At HOMAG, there is no sending process. They fetch when there is new stuff. And now there's a big difference. In the process before, we had the configuration part on the LSP side, and now the configuration part moves to the in-house process. So HOMAG or anyone else who ships XLIFF is responsible for the process and the correct configuration of the system. And this is good, as only guys at HOMAG knows that something changed. So if something changed, XLIFF process has to be adapted. And the project management is also part of the in-house process. And now we have to translate the content, and now we don't import any kind of format. We import XLIFF to the CAT tool. We do the pre-translation, translation process, post-editing, update translation memory. We export the XLIFF files. So that's the same, but it's more compact. It's more clear what's the job of the LSPs. And after that, after the XLIFF content is exported, we have to import it to the DITA, to the repository, and in this step, the XLIFF files has to be reconverted to DITA, of course. So you want to store and manage the DITA content, and from there you can release, publish whatever you want to do with the content. And that's the main difference, that the responsibility of data and process is not at the LSP anymore. It's back to the content owner. Okay, and as the content owner gets the XLIFF, the translated XLIFF files back, he can manage it in their system and have all the translations managed in-house. And of course, as we have this process, we see it in the HOMAG scenario, we have the possibility to full automate this complete process. And full automation means automation until another human is necessary to handle stuff. And this is in a normal case, the translator, of course. So if you are the owner of your content again, you have control over your processes. You can do with your data whatever you want. You don't have to care about the LSP. You get independent from the LSP. You get independent from tools. It doesn't matter if the LLP uses Stratos across MemoQ, whatever, and you can implement a continuous improvement process for your content. And you can automate whatever you want and whatever makes sense. So let's go to the part saving money. How can we save money? The first thing is using XLIFF is not a reason to negotiate anything with the LSP. So when we are using XLIFF, the amount of words to translate is the same as before. So one LSP come to me and say, oh, we have a customer, it's great that FrameMaker supports XLIFF now, but he wants to negotiate the price and we have some trouble now. And that's not the reason, because the work that the LSP has to be done, has to do, is the same as before. There are words which needs to be translated, and that's what's his job and what he is asking a price for. But you see before that the configuration part of this whole process moved to your in-house responsibility. And now you can make use of the knowledge of the LSP as he knows how content needs to be translated, how content needs to be segmented, and so on. So take the knowledge of the LSP and learn from him how to configure such a process. And then penetrate and automate translation process to save money. That's the point where you can save money. The point is automation, and due to the automation part, you can reduce processing time. And that's the point where you can save money with an XLIFF-based process. So, furthermore, if we are talking about translation, at least in Germany, we always need 100% and better 101% in all our content, and wherever we are doing anything, we want to have 100% or more. And I'm sure not every content in your documentation needs 100% quality. Not every language where your content is shipped to needs 100% quality. So why not talking about machine translation for these parts? And of course, there is some content which needs 100% and 50 review processes before one content is released. And there we have something which is called metadata. And metadata can help to make control in this process. So you can send content which is where certain metadata are assigned to, can go to machine translation or can go the classic translation process with human translation and 50 review processes in between. Okay, and the other thing, when we are talking with DITA, in DITA we are using DITA to reuse content, and we can think about this reuse step, as it is a lot of effort, of course, to manage this reuse content. Do we need to reuse content in a translation scenario. So in a source language, of course, we need it because we want to have reuse. If we make changes anywhere, we want to have this content updated in several other documentations. But do we need this in translation? It's worth to think about this. Why don't we think about translation as we do think in a publication process? Yeah, it doesn't work in any case, but it's worth to think about that, as it reduces the effort of managing this content. And as I said, with DITA, we have metadata to control the process. We have metadata in a prologue of a content of a topic. We have the content structure itself. We have at most elements in DITA. We have a translate attribute which we can set to yes or no. In a normal case, it's set to yes by default. We can use semantics. We can use the profiling attributes. That's where this reuse item comes from. So can we make translation on a profile publication? And as we saw in the case of homework, we have specialized topic types where we can make use of certain structures and, in this case, metadata. And as topics are used in several maps, we can also use this relationship where a topic is used to control the process. How important is this content? Is it a safety part, or is it a legal stuff which needs 100%, or is it something where you explain some code where it doesn't matter if it's 100% or 95%? So if you see the translate attribute in DITA, we can set a paragraph to translate no. So this paragraph does not need any translation, but the paragraph above needs it. So we can make control at this point, at each element, at each content element. Do we need translation or not? Then we have the audience attribute. Maybe you have content which is for experts only, and you know experts always use the English version of your documentation. Why do you need to translate this stuff here? I'm sorry. This sentence, experts always use English version. Why must this be translated? If you have software documentation, you will use an element which is called palm name. So why you don't need and you don't want to have parameter names translated. So that's the semantic part, the audience attribute for profiling DITA content, and the palm name as an example for a semantic structure. And then we have the prologue where we can set permissions. The view is internal. So why do we need to go complex human-based translation process with a quality of 100% if this document is used for internal purposes, for discussion or whatever? So we can go with a machine translation process and translate the content with a machine translation system like Google, Bing, or DeepL. So there are a lot of semantics in your DITA content where you can make use to control the translation of the content itself, and you can control your translation process. And how could such a process looks like? Let's see it with our product DTS. We have a repository, any kind of CCMS system or Git or SVN or whatever. And we have connectors to the system to export and re-import DITA content, and processors convert this content to XLIFF. And depending on the metadata I showed before, we can decide if we want to have machine translation or not. If we don't want to have machine translation, content is sent to a CAT tool. And after translation, content is sent back as a bilingual XLIFF document, converted back to DITA, and uploaded back to the repository. But what if we want to have machine translation as we have seen it in this example? So we get a content with permissions set to view internal. In this case, we have a switch and say, oh, okay, DITA content is internal. And in this case, we can send this content to machine translation, get a bilingual XLIFF document back, the same as we get from the CAT tool, maybe with a lower quality, of course, as machine translation is not as good as a human process, at least today. Maybe tomorrow we have another situation. And then we send the content back to the repository the same way as we did it in a CAT tool. And what we also can do is combine both. So if you say the internal stuff, we need a quick English or German translation, let's go through machine translation, send it back to the repository. You can publish that to a PDF. And parallelly, we can send this pre-translated content from machine translation to a CAT tool, where a human translator, professional translator, reworks this pre-translated content from the machine translation system. And then, few days later, we get the translation back with 100% quality, send it back to the repository, and update the system. And so we can decide it for a special document type, for a special topic type, or whatever, how we can manage this process. Let's see, this process is a little bit complex, so let's reduce the complexity for the moment and go back to Adobe FrameMaker, which supports XLIFF exports and imports since FrameMaker 2020 for DITA and all unstructured documents also. So what does the process in FrameMaker looks like? You open your DITA sources in FrameMaker. FrameMaker has an integrated ITS processor and SRX processor. We will see later what it is. So what are two processors to convert content to XLIFF. Then the content is zipped and you can send it to the CAT tool or to the LSP. Import it, translate it, and if translation is done, you get the XLIFF targets back. And then you open the XLIFF documents or the package in FrameMaker, and it's automatically converted back to translated DITA documents. So XLIFF generation is integrated in FrameMaker out of the box. So if you install FrameMaker 2020, select file translation and you get the XLIFF access to the XLIFF process. DITA 1.1 and 1.2.1.3 is pre-configured in FrameMaker. So all of the elements are pre-configured with ITS rule. You can configure or override this standard implementation via XLIFF translation settings file. It's called XTS. And this process really works on standards. it works with DITA, it works with XLIFF, with ITS, SRX. And MIF translation is also integrated in FrameMaker, but that's not our topic today. So let's see how this works in FrameMaker. We open an English map, so let's have a short look in it. There's some text which needs translation. So we open the DITA map or a single topic, whatever you need. Then we select File, Translate, Export to XLIFF. First, export to XLIFF. Then you get a short dialog where you can say where the export file has to be stored, which configuration setting, that's the XTS file where all the ITS and SRX rules are defined, and which source language. You can override the default, which is read from the DITA map. And you can select if you want to embed the skeleton. We will see later what a skeleton is. And if you want to apply segmentation rules. So if you set this checkbox, the process pre-segments all the content. And if you unselect, it's not pre-segmented. So you can decide if you want to pre-segment or if the cat tool has to pre-segment the DITA content. So now you press export, and then the file is stored in this folder. And don't do it as it's annoying. So let's go to the stuff here. That's the export you create. You create a report which is empty in this demo, of course, but here, if you encounter any issues, this is reported here. And then you get a zip file which has the XLIFF content. All the topics and the DITA map itself is converted to XLIFF with all the content which needs translation. And this zip file can be sent to the LSP by mail in the easiest way. You can also upload it to a shared folder where the LSP has access to, and so it can fetch it automatically. You don't need to send it again. Here's the content, and this is imported to the cat tool, translated there. And if it's finished, we have a XLIFF translated folder, and here is the German content in. So if we select translation, import XML, we select the XLIFF sources we get from the translator. We select the output folder where we want to store the content. Okay, now it's the Windows issue, not sure. Select this folder. Okay. Not sure what's wrong now with my browser window here. Okay, now we have it. Select OK, apply, and now the XLIFF content is converted back to DITA, and this DITA is stored here in the document. And if you open this translated content, file name are the same, of course. These are English. We don't want to have file names translated. And now we have our German content. Okay, that's all. Quite easy. You have control over your process. Just select export to XLIFF, send this to the translation, to the translator. He has to translate this, send you the XLIFF back, and you can re-import the stuff to FrameMaker, and the job is done. And all the stuff is how things needs to be translated, if things needs translation, is configured on your side, and you can decide how the process and the data are converted. So a little bit technology. Have a look at the time. Okay, 20 minutes. So let's go ahead. So
yeah, we got the time.
Yeah. So let's talk about XLIFF, ITS, and SRX, how all these three standards are working together. Let's start from the XML or DITA to XLIFF part. So we have the source and XLIFF as the target when we export the stuff from our DITA repository. We need XML, ITS rules, and we need a processor which takes the XML files, the DITA files, map the ITS rule against the XML file, and creates an XLIFF file for translation. In a second step, if you select the checkbox, if you want to have segmentation or not, if this checkbox is selected, a second processor is needed, which takes the source content and segments it. And these segmentation rules are defined in the SRX files. Processor takes both files and creates an XLIFF. So all is done with the tooling, within the tooling. So, and the tooling in this case before was FrameMaker. After translation, we have XLIFF content, translated XLIFF content, and in this XLIFF file, we have the source and the target, as a source content and the target content, the translated target content. And we have a skeleton. A skeleton is something which has content which does not need translation and which has the original structure of the content. And both things are merged together, and we get our XLIFF, our XML files or DITA files back, and we can publish the DITA files to PDF, HTML5, whatever. So what is XLIFF? XLIFF in a long is XML localization interchange file format. It's an OASIS standard. It's independent from a source format, so you can use it for Word documents, for DITA files, any custom XMLs, Markdown, whatever. You just need a conversion engine from this format to XLIFF. And it's an interface format for CAD tools. Most CAD tools support XLIFF. XLIFF 1.2 most, and there's a new version, it's 2.1 or 2.0, which was released 2018, which is not supported by all CAD tools, but 1.2 is supported by, let's say, all. And XLIFF is a bilingual format, so we have, if we come back from translation, we have the source content in the source language, and we have the translated content in the target language. So both information are stored in the same file. And XLIFF is part of the open architecture for XML authoring and localization, in short OAXAL. And in this package, we find some stuff like XML, Unicode, translation, memory exchange, TMX. We find the internationalization tag set, ITS, which we are using in this process. And we find the segmentation rule set, the SRX standard, and some more in this package, in this architecture for XML authoring and localization. So from DITA to XLIFF, and now we will see some angle brackets, of course. We have a DITA topic with a title. The yellow things needs translation. We have the title which needs to be translated. We have our audience part we saw before. We don't want to have translation for that. We have the program name element. We don't want to translate this, but we need the text translated after this parameter name. So if we convert the DITA file to XLIFF, it looks like this. We have a file where we have the name of the original file. If we go back to FrameMaker, we want to have the same file structure and folder structure where the source languages are stored. So this information is used to generate the file name we want to have. So the translator can rename the XLIFF file in a way he wants. It doesn't matter as long as it does not change this attribute. And we define what is the source language of this content and what is the language of the content we expect back from the translator. And then we have a body which takes the content which needs translation, and for each content we have a translation unit and a source element where the source language, source content is in. We have a second translation unit also with a source element with a G which represents the program name on the left side. And we have the content never need translation for translation. So this is the stuff which was sent to the LSP, to the translator, and this is imported into the CAT tool and translated there. I talked about the skeleton before, and as we see here, as we send the XLIFF file, we don't have any information about our DITA or DITA structure. Do we have a topic, a task, or whatever? It doesn't matter in XLIFF. So we need to have this information. So if we come back from translation, we want to generate this structure. And this is where the skeleton comes in. So we have the XLIFF file, and on the right side we have the skeleton. You see the topic, title, and you see some translation IDs here which are mapped, but you don't see the content of the title itself because it's on the left side in the source element. We have our content for the audience expert. We want to have it back but not translated, but in the source language we want to have it. And the same for the parameter name. We don't want to translate it, but when we come back from translation, our system needs this information to have the correct content in the target language. So that's what the skeleton means. And the skeleton can be embedded into the XLIFF file, or it can be stored externally. And that's what the That's what this checkbox here means. Embed skeleton to XLIFF or do not embed the skeleton in XLIFF. So we want to have it in one file or in a separate file. And sometimes if you have large content, it's not the case for DITA, but for FrameMaker documents, perhaps the Exif file or the skeleton file will be very fat. So the XLIFF file size is very high. So it's better to exclude it from the XLIFF to keep the file size of the XLIFF small. That's the reason why we can embed or not embed. More stable for the process is, of course, to embed it in the XLIFF so we have both together. So let's see how an XLIFF looks like before and after translation. So before we saw it, we have the source element where the content which needs translation is in. And when it comes back, we have the bilingual topic. We have the source, XLIFF translation, and the target, XLIFF Übersetzung. And the same for the second translation unit. So, and now when we come back from translation, this is from when content comes back from translator, this is the stuff we get. And now we have to put this together with the skeleton to generate our topic again. So we put the target to the title, we put the other target to this P element, and we get this not translatable content back from the skeleton. And that's all for XLIFF. That's how XLIFF works. Very easy, I think. At least at this point. So why do we need ITS? ITS, the Internationalization Tag Set in version 2, is a standard to tag XML content for translation. So the most important elements in this standards are ITS translate rule. So you can say this element needs translation, yes, or it doesn't need translation, no. And you can define within text rule. So is it a block level element? Is it a P? Or is it an inline element like italic, or italic in DITA it's I? So you can define, is it part of the segment, or is this element, should this element build an own segment? What you need to configure ITS rule is XPath knowledge, small XPath knowledge. So let's see how it looks like. We have our topic again, and we want to translate the title and this never needed translation in the P element. So how does this look like first? We can write it in the DITA content by hand. We can say ITS translate yes, the audience paragraph ITS translate no, the other element is P element is translate yes, but the parameter is translate no, but it is within text yes. So it's part of this paragraph, and it must not build a non-segment. So if we have this, where we can write it manually by hand into the DITA topic, we can define a separate rules file. And this is more intelligent than writing it by hand into a DITA topic. We define rules and say any element in this topic needs translation. But elements with the audience expert does not need translation. And program name don't need translation, and it is within text. This is wrong here. I see this must be a translate rule and a separate within text rule. So I did something wrong here. Sorry for that. So, and if you are talking DITA, we have to make sure to support inheritance, especially then if we are specializing content. So if we specialize an element which inherits the behavior of program name, we want to have the same behavior as program name. So we need to write our selector not a program name, but we need to define which contains program name in a class attribute. And so if you specialize content, and have an element which inherits from a program name, it behaves like a program name until you say something different in another rule. Okay? So if we write our rules this way, and that's the way how it's implemented in FrameMaker, you can use the XLIFF translation process with any DITA derivation, with any specialized topic. And with this kind of technique, you will reduce the rule set to a minimum. The other part is SRX, and I think make a little bit faster now. SRX is a segmentation rule set maintained by Gala, designed for segmenting text and unit knowledge in regular expressions to define these rules. And if you have XLIFF generated based on ITS in combination with SRX and the processor, you get the segmented file. I jump over this technical part. If you have questions to SRX, send me an email and I will answer it. So, short conclusion, if you use XLIFF-based processes, you will get the ownership of translated back to your company. You get independent from CAT tools and service providers. You have standardized and stable processes. You have possibilities to automate the processes however you want or which makes sense. And you can reduce processing time and implement the same process for DITA and any kind of other content format. So ask your language service professionals to set up your translation rule set to support you in setting up this process. And that's it from my side. I have put some links to this slide, and Stefan has this slide, so I think he will publish this with the recording. And yeah, if you have any questions, please contact us, send an email, or follow us on Twitter or whatever. Thank you for listening.